Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Welcome to Sketchbook Sunday, and today we are going to sketch a piece of pizza, but first I want to show you what I did with my gouache palette. I didn't like having my gouache in individual containers. I originally put them in there because I didn't want them to crack and fall out and get mixed up in a regular palette, but then after using them for about 6 months, I decided I wanted something different. So I found this 18 cubby compact toolbox at Harbor Freight for $3, and I thought I'd give that a try. So I wanted to make sure that those little borders couldn't come out and let paint seep underneath, so I'm sealing it up with some hot glue, and I did that for all the little dividers in this case. Then I simply dislodged the cracked paint pieces and put them in each cubby. Now I made sure I picked a case that was compact so that it wouldn't take up a lot of space in my desk, but I also made sure that it was big enough for me to fit a 1-inch brush in, which it is. Now some colors I noticed had the same pigment makeup or really close, so I did combine them into one container, and that way I could take those 24 colors and make them work in an 18 color case. Now I did have a couple colors that I wasn't able to fit in here, but I didn't use them very often, so I decided to just keep them in their original containers, and that was the black, peach, and gray. So they're in their own little, individual cubbies. I got both of these boxes at Harbor Freight, and they worked pretty well, the individual ones, but I just realized that I always wish I had all of them open. Sometimes I'd have to stop and go find another color and open it up, and it was just kind of a hassle for me. So this worked out quite a bit better. So because all the pieces were all kind of dried out and condensed, they re-wet really well, but I decided that I didn't want them to be kind of chunky, so I did decide to add a little water and add some glycerin to them and kind of stirred it up with a toothpick, and that did help it kind of stay moist, and you'll see that when we paint. The other thing I liked about this inexpensive container I moved everything to was that I could take the lid off really easily and use that for a palette or just set it aside. I prefer to mix on a ceramic plate, which you can see on the screen there, but it's a great option if I'm traveling or I just don't have a plate with me. So I'm starting off by sketching a slice of pizza with a mechanical pencil, and I will link up the reference photo from Unsplash in the video description. I used one slice. It's a whole pizza that there's a picture of, but I just cropped it and used one slice for mine. And I just basically sketched on some toppings. I thought it would be really fun to do the texture of the bread and the texture of all of the different vegetables on there and the texture of the cheese. I just thought it would be really a fun subject to paint, so that's why I chose it for this week's Sketchbook Sunday. Pizza is a really fun subject to draw and paint because it's very organic in the fact that every slice can be a little different. It can be a little misshapen. You can have extra toppings. You can add in more toppings if you feel like it. There's a lot of fun textures, and it's just a very forgiving, fun thing to paint. So even if you're a beginner, please give it a try. It's fun. Draw whatever interests you. Nothing is harder than anything else. Just have fun with it. So I'm starting off with my Arteza Real Brush pens. I'm not sure if it's Arteza or Arteza. I tend to go back and forth with how I pronounce it, but I decided to use a couple shades of brown to get in some of those dark shadows, and part of this is because I really liked doing the hamburger a couple weeks ago using the underpainting in the markers, and I just did a tutorial on Friday, a long real-time one on grisaille in watercolor, and it's very much the same technique. So I'm going in and putting in these dark colors right off the bat, knowing that they're going to help the layers I put on top feel a little bit more grounded and realistic. So it's also just a really great way to kind of portion off different parts of your picture so that you can kind of go in confidently with the gouache. Gouache is opaque. However, if you thin it down, you can add it to your picture kind of like watercolor. I wouldn't thin it too much on this paper, but yeah, it's just a really good technique. Now I did wet the paper where I wanted the shadow, and then I went in with the Real Brush pens in browns and grays to kind of just give a little local shadow, just to give it a place to kind of sit on my paper as if it's sitting on a white plate. Now the reference photo I'm going to link to, hopefully I won't forget. If I do, let me know and I will make sure I go back and put it in. It's going to show it on a black background, but I'm obviously painting it on white. I could paint the paper black, but I just prefer to have a white background a lot of the time, and that just helped me add a kind of a setting. And now I've added some yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and burnt umber gouache to my plate, and I'm just kind of toning everything basically. So I am going darker than what the pizza is, what the reference photo is, because I like to get my shadows in first. I like to tone everything, and then I can build up highlights, and it's just a nice, easy way to work, I think. With gouache, you have that ability. You don't have to save whites, and it's just a pleasant way to work. Now I'm adding some white onto my palette so I can mix it in with some of those earthy tones to get the cheese values in there. And I'm just basically mixing it in with a little yellow ochre so it's not so cool in temperature, and just dabbing it in there to make some of the cheese. And you can go right over the toppings because the toppings will be on top of the cheese usually. And if you do need to like bring a little cheese on top of that later, you can with gouache because it is opaque and you can keep building. It's just a really, really fun media to work with. And it's a nice change of pace from watercolor because you know, you get to work in a different method. You get to work in a method that's similar to acrylics or oils even. You can work alla prima all at once, but if you decide that you wish you could soften something or blend something, you can go in with a damp brush and you can reconstitute the paint, which you can't with acrylics. The other thing I really like about gouache is that it can be in my palette. Like I showed you how I set my palette up, it can live there. And all I got to do is use a wet brush and it's paint again. So that's why I tend to prefer it to acrylics, but if you prefer acrylics, you can do this project that I'm showing you in the same method with acrylics. In fact, I don't think I went back at all and reconstituted anything, so this would be perfect to do in acrylics if you prefer. You could do it on canvas. It would be a really fun decoration for a kitchen, I think. And I'm just, you know, dabbing on because I want to get that texture. I want to get the soft doughy texture of the crust. I want to get the melty texture of the cheese, and that comes by layering up a lot of different dabs of paint. Painting vegetable toppings is really fun because there's so many colors and textures you can add. I really liked these like Vidalia onions, or I think that's what they are, the purple onions or red onions. I thought that was just a really nice fun texture against the yellows and the cheeses. And then really the sky's the limit. You can add you know, pineapple or peppers or mushrooms, black olives, whatever you want, and get those different textures. You could also add in things like bacon or you know, other meats that would, or pepperonis or something that would give you maybe glossy textures or you know, just juicy, greasy textures, I guess, that would make it fun to paint as well. But I stuck to vegetables because that was what was in my reference photo. And although I don't eat cheese, I'm a vegetarian, so it is fun to do a veggie pizza. I think it's more interesting to paint with cheese than just sauce, how I usually make it. So that's why I'm doing the cheesy version. So it's really important when you're painting to look at the different nuances and colors. So like your red pepper strips aren't just going to be red. They're going to have red, and then they're going to have some yellowy red, then they're going to have some like almost white membrane area in there, and you want to get all of that. You want to get the highlights in the onion skin to show you the texture, that ridged texture that the slices of onions have. You want to get little dabs for the like glossiness of little white sparkles, which you probably put on the end with a gel pen of, you know, the kind of the glossy texture of the slices, the edge of the slices of, you know, some of the peppers. So you really want to look at your reference photo for those different textures to make sure that you're representing them. The more of those little nuanced textures you get in there, the more realistic your picture is going to be. Especially when you're doing food, you know, you want to, you know, get those enticing textures in there that makes you want to just kind of, you know, go have a slice of pizza or something. I really enjoy food illustration. It's something I've been into lately, not professionally, obviously, just for fun. I thought about, it might be fun to reach out to a publisher I've worked with before and see if they have any cookbooks that want to be illustrated, but I realized that I really prefer teaching art to illustrating, because when you're illustrating, you're painting what somebody else tells you to do, and when you're teaching, you're telling other people what to paint, basically, and that's way more fun for me anyway. The gouache I'm using is also Arteza. I'm saying Arteza now, isn't that interesting? And I really enjoy it. I've been using it for quite a long time now. Oh, I would say 6 months or more. And I really like it. There are a few colors in there that are very similar. So there's two greens that I would say were like a permanent green light and a permanent green medium. So I put them together in the same container because they were mixes, and they're close enough. I did that also with another, I think there was another green in there that I mixed them because they were close enough, and I always have to alter my greens anyway, so I figured that was fine. So I did use that green, and then I used a little bit of Prussian blue to kind of add to the green to rim it, to give the outside skin of the slices a little bit more depth and darkness. Then I added some white on my brush and just lightened up the ridge of the pepper that's further away from the skin, because you usually have that light membrane on the pepper slices. Now, the reason I didn't put my black gouache in my new palette, because I only had 18 slots, so I had to get rid of some, is because I prefer to mix my own blacks. I did keep the little container of black just in case I want it in the future, maybe for a grisaille or something, or grisaille actually. But like I used that Prussian blue, some of the red I used for the peppers, together they made almost a perfect black olive color. And I just prefer to mix it from stuff I'm already using because it does give you more of a natural dark. It doesn't seem out of place or like you've cut a hole in your painting. So that's why I did that. And now I'm mixing up a little bit of a creamy yellow color for just some richness to the cheese, kind of like the edges of the cheese where like I think cheese grease kind of mixes with like your marinara sauce and you get that orangey color, because mozzarella cheese is really white, really quite white, so you really wouldn't see a lot of like orange. That's kind of like your stereotypical pizza. We don't want pizza stereotypes here, man. We want to paint a really authentic, legit pizza. And I'm dabbing in red because there was so much red really on the pizza, looking at the reference photo, more than I would have expected. And I think that's because, you get some sauce up onto the dough crust area, and then some sauce is going to peek through, some sauce is going to peek through between like the pieces of cheese, the shreds of cheese as they melt. And, where the toppings might have like tucked underneath the cheese, you're going to get some of that sauce up there. So really you see a lot of red, more red than I would have expected. So that's another reason it's handy to look at reference photos until you really know a subject well, because there's nuances that you're just not going to remember. I don't eat pizza enough to remember these nuances. I don't eat cheese pizza or pizza with cheese on it, so I'm not going to really notice that, even though other members of my family do. I don't really stare at pizza. You're not going to stare at pizza for an hour to, remember all the nuances like you would if you're painting and you're looking back and forth to a reference photo. So reference photos are definitely useful until you build, your memory and your observation skills. So don't feel bad about using reference photos. It's great if you could take your own reference photos, because then you can really get in there, look closely, observe first and second hand, but it's not always possible. So sites like Unsplash are really valuable for that. Now I'm going in with that same dark mix. It's kind of like the mix I used for olive, but it's really more brown, more of a burnt umber, and less of the blue, so it's not quite as black. And I'm just going in and adding some strong shadows around some of the toppings and some of the overlapping parts of the crust where the crust kind of comes in and bubbles up. Everybody loves those pizza bubbles. At least my kids do. They're always like, oh, I want the piece with a bubble on it, right? And so it's kind of fun to depict those bubbles that are in like the cheese and the bread, and it just gives you an interesting element to a very ordinary subject. I mean, a slice of pizza, you've seen a million in your life, right? Probably, well, maybe not a million, I don't know. You've seen a lot of pizza, and from commercials to, photographs to pizza you've actually eaten. So, it's an ordinary subject that people don't take the time to look at. I think it's really fun to paint subjects like that because it forces people to take a look at it. I think that's why I really like painting food, because the textures are just so enticing and interesting. I mean, they're made to be enticing. Food is meant to be, you're meant to look at food and want to eat it, right? So they're fun things to paint because they are things that we as humans will find visually pleasing and enticing, because it's going to appeal to more than just our visual sense. It's going to appeal to our sense of taste and smell and hunger and whatnot. So here I'm dabbing in some more highlights to brighten up the cheese, because I had the value too dark still, but that's all right because I was intending to brighten up as I go. I didn't want it to be washed out or bleached out, so that's why I started dark and working to light. And that's also a treat to work in this fashion where I mostly do watercolors. So it's nice to be able to layer up those lights as I need them. And I'm just basically trying to figure out what else this piece needs. I knew I needed some highlight, and I knew I didn't want just white because it wasn't going to look right. So looking at the reference photo, I can see my highlights have a little blue in them, and usually highlights do. If it's something that's been naturally lit, your highlight is going to have a little bit of blue to it because your daylight corrected bulbs are going to have a blue tint, or sunlight has a blue tint to it when you see it reflected on something. I know you may think that it would have a yellow tint, but no, it's like incandescent lights will have a yellow tint, or candlelight will have a yellow tint, or fire will have a yellow tint, but sunlight has a blue tint to it. And you want to make sure you use that if you want something to look really realistic, especially if you have something lit with like a color corrected bulb. Most professional photography will have like a daylight, unless it's like the end of the day where everything is kind of golden lit. it where the, you know, the sun is low in the sky, it's going to have a little bit of a blue tint to it. But always trust your eyeballs. Look at what your reference photo is telling you or what your eyes are telling you, and paint the highlights with a color tone that you see. Otherwise, the rest of your picture is going to be off. So you just, you know, really trust your eyes. If you're using multiple reference photos, that's fine. You can use composition from another one, but make sure that your lighting, your color is coming from the same reference photo, so that you don't have like one pepper that's got a yellow highlight on it and one pepper that's got a blue highlight on it. You want all of those colors to agree, and that's one of the reasons I like to mix colors. Even though I have 18 colors in front of me, I'm not using 18 colors. I'm using probably 6 colors, and I'm mixing those colors from it so that they agree. And the more experience you have painting, the more you'll be able to pull in more colors and have them agree, or work in other medias and have them agree. We are going to be doing some mixed media in a minute here. We'll be bringing in some colored pencil and some gel pen, but you'll see how I treat that so that I get an overall agreement in my painting. Before going on to another medium such as gel pen or colored pencil, you really want to dry that gouache layer. Make sure there's no dampness to your paper, because for one, your media might not stick, and for the other thing, you may tear your paper because wet paper is much more fragile than dry paper. So what I'm doing here is dabbing on the glossy, glistening edges of my peppers, and also any other little highlights that I want to put in there. But it's I'm mostly just stippling, which is like tap, 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 making little dots, because that gives you that beautiful glisten, which you would have with like things that are greasy or things that are wet. That's what I want to get there. And now I'm using a white colored pencil, and I am using my Prismacolors because they're handy right on the side of my desk. And the white is more opaque than the Arteza colored pencil. I got a little bug crawling across my palette there. Oh, so sorry, how embarrassing. And so I'm also using some of the kind of yellow ochre color from Prismacolor, and I am scumbling on using the edge of the lead pretty much all over the dough and the cheese to kind of unify it and give it that golden hue that you would have with the bread and the cheese. I'm doing the same with this like poppy red to bring out the red in the sauce and kind of give that luminous color, but I'm doing it everywhere so that it's harmonizing everything as I work. I find the Prismacolor pencils to be a little more opaque and a little more soft than the Arteza, but they are very similar. So depending on your budget, the one thing I will say that Prismacolors really beats Arteza at would be the opacity and the softness of color and how much color laydown you get without very much pressure. The thing that Arteza has on Prismacolor is that their pencils are less likely to break. They seem to be a little bit stronger, but they're also pretty soft. So in the Prismacolor pencils, like in the pastel range, you have a much better pastel range. Arteza doesn't have a very good pastel range, and their colors are more transparent, so they're not going to show up as well on top of other things. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your pencils. Sometimes the price can be very similar, and other times it's quite different. Now here I'm using a Prismacolor very thin black colored pencil to get really fine shadows, so that I'm outlining the shadow edge of the pizza. I am outlining some of the areas where I have painted shadow in there, just to give it a little bit more crispness and depth. And I'm just doing that here and there. And I'm using the very thin pencil because it's not going to lay down as much color as a traditional Prismacolor Premier pencil. I only have a couple of the very thin pencils. They came in a set of manga colors that I bought, because Prismacolors have always been my favorite color pencil. I have Polychromos, I have a few Caran d'Ache. Prismacolors still are always my favorite, and the reason is the color laydown, and I like the semi-opaqueness of them, and I just really love the way they blend and work. Other people, like the breakage is enough of a thing to get people to not even bother with them, and they had a few years where they were really sending out subpar pencils. So I bought a small set, the manga set, just to see. I paid like $10 for it on Amazon, just to see if the pencils were any good anymore, or if they were still having issues, and the pencils were fine, and they were laying down great, and they seemed to be as good as the older ones. Some of the colors were a little different, but like even with the same number, but I really thought the quality was still there. So then I did buy a bigger set to replace my older set. I haven't even cracked into that one yet. I'm still using my older pencils and that Magna set that had a few very thins, but I didn't like the very thins. But I did find that using the black, just for adding a crisp little division basically between subjects, between elements, just to give them a little hairline of that deep shadow area, it was ideal for that. I don't need a full set of them. I think think one black is fine, one brown. I found the very thins to be kind of brittle, and some of them broke, so I just wasn't really that impressed with them. But there's my synopsis on Prismacolor pencils. Not that I meant to go there today, but I'll link everything up in the video description so you have the options there. Now I'm using gouache to dab in some of the highlights in the mozzarella cheese, like those brighter chunks of cheese where you've had a lot of cheese melt together and you get that more pure white area. That's what I'm doing there. Pretty much everything though I am tinting with a little bit of other paint, so I'm not really painting bright white, even though it looks like I am grabbing some other colors, adding a little bit more ochres and creamy whites to the crust, just to make it look a little bit better. And there you have it. I want to thank you so much for watching today. This was a lot of fun to paint. It took me about an hour and a half, maybe an hour, no, not that long, but an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 10 minutes to do this, but it was so much fun, and I'm so glad you tuned in today. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Ask me any questions in the comments below. Until next time, happy crafting.